Okay, so hello everyone. I'm Chris Finneral. I am calling in from New York City, and I'm here today to talk about meeting productivity within remote teams. So I'm going to just share my screen. Oh, actually, screen is already shared. So let me move into presentation mode as well. Hopefully, you guys can see the full screen. Great. So let me start off with a bit of a goal here. So I want to help the people on this call, either if you're individuals part of a bigger company or if you have a team, help you achieve more through some simple changes to how you do meetings. Before I go into that, just a bit of background on me. So I'm Chris Finneral. I'm CEO and co-founder of SketchDeck. We're a graphic design team powered by a software platform. We work with marketing teams of lots of different companies, from startups through to like Fortune 500 companies. We have a core team of about 15 of us who are building the kind of product and doing sales and marketing and such. We have a broader design team of around 50 designers around the world. And over the kind of last, I guess, 10 years that I've been in the business world, I guess I've been in more than 1,000 meetings. So as I'm sure many of you guys have here as well. And I thought I would kind of share a little bit about what I've learned and some of the kind of lessons and rules that I apply to meetings as a result of what I've learned from that time. So before we want to talk about making any changes within how you do things, it's worth just highlighting what the problem is. I did a little bit of research on this topic, and some of these stats stood out. Now, these might not necessarily apply directly to you, but I think they get at the kind of spirit of what I think many people at least experience when it comes to meeting productivity. So this was from a Harvard Business Review article, and they were saying how executives spend an average of 23 hours a week in a meeting, which is amazing. That's kind of, depending on how much work these executives are doing, that's anywhere from half to a third of their time spent in meetings. On top of that, they were saying like 71% of those execs were saying that these meetings felt unproductive or inefficient. So, I think, these stats may not apply to you directly, but the fact that many of us spend a lot of time in meetings, and so many of those meetings aren't necessarily having real impact or don't feel efficient, feels to me like there's something which is worth taking a look at. So you might just say, well, let's just stop having meetings. We don't need meetings. But obviously that's not the right answer, because we've all been in those meetings where there's a really tricky problem or there's some disagreement within a team. And these really good meetings that you've been part of can really help move the needle on things like problem solving or creating alignment in your team, or even developing skills in people within the company. So how can we align these two things? How can we get some of these really positive parts of meetings, but get rid of the feeling of another meeting, or this meeting was a waste of my time? How can we kind of connect these two ideas together and actually get good meetings happening and having those meetings feel like we're making progress? So that's what we're going to talk about today. And over the next kind of 10 minutes or so, I've kind of boiled down a lot of my thinking into some rules for productive meetings. These, like all kind of business rules, they're not, hard. You can break these rules when you need to. They're just some kind of guidelines, I guess, to kind of get you going. Worth noting as well that these rules were designed for internal meetings. So these are meetings within your company. There's probably a different set of rules when you start thinking about things like sales meetings or conference presentations like this. So I've really tried to focus down on the kind of internal meetings, because that seems to be the bulk of where meeting time is within companies. So let me kick off. So I think the first thing to think about when you're thinking about meetings is, do you even need a meeting? I'll kind of talk through some good reasons initially for meetings, and then I'll kind of come on to some of the bad reasons, of which you'll probably see many meetings that you have in your day which fall under that category. So good reasons for meetings. feedback, especially in a remote setting, is so important. You need to make sure you're building really good connections with your team. Feedback is one of those things that's always great to give one-on-one, ideally on a video call as well. And by the way, when I say feedback, that's not just kind of constructive feedback. That's also like things that people have done well that you want to congratulate them for. So feedback is great to be done in a meeting setting. Getting team alignment around important projects is also a really, really cool thing to do as part of a meeting. You can really build energy and buzz when you've got people together in a room. So make sure we're not doing it for every single project, but important projects are a great time to get people together to talk through that stuff. And then improving solutions to important problems. When we work together, often we will come up with better ideas. And as long as we're not trying to get people on a meeting for every single little problem that's coming up, it makes sense to bring people together on the most important problems you're trying to solve within your team. So there's some good reasons. Unfortunately, there's a lot of other reasons where people still have meetings. One of the classics is it's already in the diary. Like the number of meetings where people all show up for because it's in the diary, and then you look at each other going, why are we in this meeting? What's it for? So don't be afraid to cancel meetings. Meetings don't need to happen just because they're in the diary. Another one which I think has plagued me in the past, fortunately we don't have many of these anymore, but the meetings that people put in the diary every single week to kind of provide updates on some project that's going on, that's not necessary. We don't need these meetings anymore. They don't actually help with much. And then this classic one, which I think is one which maybe people on this call are still doing today. At least, I've been doing this until recently, which is a problem comes up and then the default reaction is, let's get a meeting in the diary and talk about it. That's too premature. I think many problems, if you just think about them by yourself for a little bit, or send a message to someone else that says, hey, can you ever think about this problem? People can solve problems by themselves. You don't need to have a meeting every time a problem comes up. So bad reasons for meetings, these reasons we should be, if one of these reasons is why you're having a meeting, this is a great candidate as something just to cut from the meeting schedule. So next up is, if you've decided that a meeting is something you need to do, start thinking about less time, fewer people, lower frequency. I think so often people are putting meetings in too frequently or for too long a time. And just give you a couple of examples. So the classic, let's get an hour in the diary phrase, that has happened across many businesses that I've been part of. This setting of, people always default to an hour for some reason. I think often, especially if it's just one topic you're trying to cover, a 20-25 minute meeting is a great amount of time to dig in and solve a problem. And on top of that, and I'm going to touch on this in a second, share something in advance. So don't just turn up for a meeting with nothing on the table and be starting from scratch. Put something in advance that you're sharing that you can then build upon in that meeting. Second one, so this often comes up if you're talking about a problem as a group. It can be really easy just to say, okay, let's reconvene everyone together and talk more about this. Having 5, 10 people on a call is rarely an effective way to spend time. Much better to say, Katie or one person on your team, could you work on something and let's meet one-on-one to review that. Not only are you saving the other 5 people who are there, saving their time, which adds up very quickly, you'll likely come to a better answer if you're just working on a problem with one other person, maybe 2 other people. Large group problem solvings are rarely effective. And then the other classic, which is the weekly team meeting. Again, often, it's an hour every week. People are on this call. People are, often not even working on those calls. They're off doing things in Slack or something else. It's not the most effective way to spend time. With our team meetings, we try and move to once per month. I think that's a much better cadence for team meetings. And then use other tools like Slack or, so Slack's a great one. Things like Slack to do quick stand-ups with your team one-on-one. And that can be really effective as opposed to getting everyone together on a call for an hour every week. Third one, and some of these are really obvious, but I think they're worth reminding ourselves of, and I wanted to pull them together. if you're putting a meeting in someone's diary, make sure you put down a goal for that meeting and an agenda. That will help let them know what this is a meeting about. They can even think in advance about what this meeting is, and make these things as specific as possible. I'm not going to dwell on this one too much, but just to give you, here's a quick example. Like, the goal might be like finalize and launch a growth plan. You might say there's some pre-work, which is, hey, I'm going to share out this proposal. Please read through in advance. And then, a simple agenda, 2 or 3 points is normally all that's needed, and a rough sense of time here as well. Getting something like that down will help get people aligned with what the goal is for that meeting, and they'll come to that meeting already thinking through some of the topics that they want to cover, and it will get those meetings off to a stronger start as well. Fourth up, and this is one of my most the one I probably want to highlight the most of all of these rules. And it's something which takes a little bit of practice to get into the habit of doing, but it can be a big game changer in terms of what you can achieve within meetings. So, so many meetings that I've been to, people kind of get everyone together and they'll say something like, we've got this problem with this account, what should we do about it? And that will be how they start the meeting. If you're starting a meeting like that from a total standstill with just a problem on the table, you'll find that the first 10, 15, 20 minutes is just everyone just trying to even think about what the problem could be. They're doing a lot of work, which isn't necessary to do in this big kind of group setting. It kind of takes a while to get that meeting up and running and really having some productivity. What is way more effective is one person, generally it's the person leading that meeting, but it doesn't have to be, in advance of that meeting, should put down some thoughts around what is the problem and what is a proposed solution. Coming up with an initial proposal to a solution just kind of gets something down on the table that people can review and react to. People are really good at reading something and knowing what they agree with or disagree with and then reacting from there. Whereas if you give someone a total blank canvas, it can be very hard to actually kind of get the right thinking down on paper. We use Google Docs for this. We prefer a slide deck format, but other companies can, sometimes do this as more of a Word doc format. But it doesn't matter exactly what it is. The main point is that you can get something down on paper, which the people in that meeting can read in advance and then react to, as opposed to starting from scratch. You'll find if you just do this one thing alone, nothing else from what I've talked about today, you'll find that the meetings that you have, you'll get to much better answers and you'll get there quicker than if you just start meetings from scratch. The other thing you can sometimes benefit from is if you start getting an answer down on paper, you may actually realize you just solved the problem and you don't need the meeting. There is, so often just doing some thinking yourself and trying to get an answer down in paper actually is often, you get 90% of the way there. So this is a really cool tip and one that I really strongly recommend everyone do. Number 5, and this is another obvious one, but again, it's something which I think gets forgotten. Meetings should be led by someone. And how often have you been in a meeting where it's kind of meandering around, no one's really taking the lead? And hey, it's kind of fun to hang out and chat with people, but if you're having a meeting and you're taking an hour out of a bunch of people's days, you should really make sure we're getting the goals from that meeting that's needed. It kind of overlaps a little bit with the agenda point I made before, but it's important that one person is there taking the lead. They're kicking off the meeting and reminding everyone why they're here and the goals they're trying to achieve. The second thing is they're guiding that discussion, making sure we're getting the questions answered that need to be answered. Cut tangents short. So often you'll go into a meeting and it will go off down some random path, which obviously if that's a more important thing to discuss, sure, make a conscious choice and allow that tangent to play out, but try and bring things together so you're actually getting to the right answers. And then fourth, making sure you close the meeting with a clear set of actions, especially if you've made some good progress on a problem in the meeting. There's nothing worse than just ending that meeting with no one really knowing what to do. You want to really bring it together, summarize some key points, and make sure the actions coming out of that meeting are clear. And that moves on nicely to the follow-up piece. So this is actually after the meeting. And that's all about like, if you've made progress in a meeting, you've come out with something which is going to improve your team's kind of goals or what have you. If there's actions there that need to be done, we need to make sure those actions happen. And again, so often you see a meeting happen, 3 or 4 actions have come out from that, but then it just gets forgotten because look, everyone's busy. Everyone's got, a 10 or 100 actions on their plate. It takes the person who's kind of driving this meeting forwards to make sure that those things are kind of happening. And what I always think about is, as soon as the meeting is finished, or soon after as you can, just send around a quick summary, generally attach whatever the deck was you were using, and just make it clear like the 2 or 3 points which need to happen and who's working on those. And then like, it's not always going to happen. A few days later, you should be following up again and say, hey, can you just give us a quick update on these actions? And then again, like a week or so later, just make sure like important things that have been agreed upon in a meeting do happen. And that's the rules. Hopefully those make sense. What I just want to finish up with now is, okay, like if you like what we've talked about, you're feeling some of those pain points that we've talked about yourself, and you feel some of these things in your own meetings, how can we actually take this and make change within our own teams and businesses? So the first thing I think is a great place to begin is just get some feedback from your team. We did this with a quick survey, something like Typeform or the Google survey tools. Nothing crazy, just a few questions, just to kind of get feedback up from your team. Because one thing that we noticed when we were doing some of this stuff at SketchDeck was other people felt this as well. Like, people are busy. Most people are busy, and like they felt that they were in meetings that didn't need to happen. So if you can start to get alignment within the team that we do want to make some changes with meetings, that will really help you kind of make that next step and bring the changes. I've just included a few questions here, which I think are quite effective, but obviously build this out in any way that you feel best. The next thing then is how you kind of communicate and coach this across your team. I think an important place to begin here is, starting with why. It's now kind of a cliche in business, but I think it's still very powerful, which is just up front, like, get some alignment with the team around what the importance of this, and some of those statistics I shared at the beginning about how many meetings people are having and how often people feel those meetings are ineffective. That can be great, a great motivation to make changes to how we do meetings. Second thing is running a quick training session, something similar to what we're doing right now, maybe 15 or 20 minutes where you run through some of the basic principles. Ideally in a training session, you might also do a bit of role play or some workshop to kind of help people take the lessons and apply them. But that can be a really great place and a good reason for a meeting. Hopefully, anyone here running a remote company has got a central wiki, a great place obviously to store important information for your company. So add a page on kind of meeting productivity and put materials there. This deck here that I'm walking through will be made available afterwards, so you could include this. Anything else is to kind of help people reference back to if they're thinking about how to run their meetings. And then finally, just talk about it regularly. It's unlikely that just one quick training session on meetings is going to be enough. It's good to kind of keep it top of mind and talk about the successes, identify people who seem to be struggling and help them one-on-one. That's what you'll kind of help get people to be doing this better meeting practices more regularly. And just finally, my call here is that you can start this today or maybe tomorrow, but you don't have to wait for weeks and weeks on this. And that is because pretty much everything I've talked through today is something which you can apply to your own meetings right away. You can run your own meetings in an effective way, even if the rest of the people in your company aren't. And one thing that we noticed is that once you start running meetings more effectively, people will notice. They'll comment and say, hey, like, your meetings seem to be running better now. And then they'll start asking you to like help them make their meetings better as well. So you don't have to wait on all of the bigger organizational rollout. You can just start this today, and you'll find benefits just from doing that yourself. So let me pause there, and I'll see if anyone here has any questions about either this or anything else related to meeting productivity. And I'll stop my share so I can see you guys and see the chat as well.
Thanks, Chris. I'm going to pop a link to the thought exchange into the chat and share my screen.
Oh, perfect. So, okay, so first question is, any recommendations on how to hold a manager accountable when they continually fail to host productive meetings? Sometimes folks may not be in a position of power, but know full well what's needed. Yeah, okay, interesting one. So a couple of thoughts on this. First thing, well, I'll talk about this from what I've experienced, but I don't know all the situations here. Obviously, every type of manager relationship is different. But first thing I would probably say is it's worth providing that feedback if you believe their meetings are not being run effectively. Just share that feedback with them. Maybe even share something like the deck that I walked through today as an example of some kind of lessons on how to run meetings more effectively. It may just not be something that the manager is aware of. And obviously do that in a kind of positive and constructive way as best possible. Managers are not perfect. Managers will fail at things. So if you can help them or identify a shortcoming, that's a great place to begin. So that's kind of one thing I'd suggest. Second thing I'd suggest is start running your own meetings in a better way. I assume that your manager will be part of some of your own meetings. So if you can actually demonstrate how a good meeting is run, they'll see that and they'll probably want to kind of mirror some of that behavior themselves. So those are a couple of things I'd suggest there. Obviously, ultimately it's very difficult if you've got a manager that's not a very good manager, and it's sometimes hard to actually fix that situation. Hopefully the people above that manager will identify that and make changes at some point. Okay, should I take the next question?
Please.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. Okay, sorry. Okay, how do you handle when you're running the meeting and you have someone with higher ranking going on tangents? Couple of things. One is, I think if you're leading that meeting, you should feel okay by kind of trying to bring the conversation back in. Again, just do it in a respectful way. And most managers will respect that. I myself sometimes go off on a tangent in a meeting that's being run by someone who reports to me, and I actually appreciate it when they bring me back in and keep me on track. So I would just have the confidence to do it, and as long as you're doing it in a kind of constructive and professional way, I think that's very appropriate. If it's happening repeatedly and you feel like they are not they're not kind of responding to how you're trying to control the meeting, again, I think that's something where it's worth just having a quick chat with them and maybe asking what they suggest. You could say, hey, I have this meeting. This was the goal I was trying to achieve from this meeting, but I couldn't achieve that goal because we spent half the meeting talking about this other topic. What would you recommend? Some kind of approaching a manager like that is quite useful. And you may learn something from that exchange. It may be, for example, that the manager will tell you, hey, like, we shouldn't be spending our time focused on this problem. There's this much bigger problem over there. So you may learn something from that exchange as well. Okay, next one. So what do you say to people in a meeting to prepare them for you to follow up a few days later? Some people are sensitive. Yeah, it's a good one. I generally just believe that if someone has agreed to an action, so again, this one falls under two categories. Either like, so if the people in the room have agreed to the set of actions that you've discussed in the meeting, that's kind of, the follow-up is one thing. But if it's like someone else in the room doesn't actually want to do the action that they're assigned to, that's actually a different problem. So let me address each one. So if John in your meeting has said, yes, I will do that, I actually don't think there's too much issue following up with John a couple of days later. Again, theme here, just do it in a positive, constructive, professional way. Just say, hey, John, like, we did that meeting a couple of days ago. You said you would do X. How's that coming along? I think that's perfectly fine. And you can do that to someone who's above you, your peer, or below you. If they've agreed to do it, I think it's very reasonable to follow up and ask how that's coming on. If the problem is actually that John needs to do something, but John doesn't want to do it, that's something which I wouldn't try and address and tackle in the meeting. I would say, hey, John, can we maybe catch up afterwards and just figure out how do we get this thing happening? Hopefully you can have a conversation. If you agree that the action should happen, like someone needs to call this client or what have you, you can just say, hey, John, this needs to happen. You seem like the best person to do it, but if you think someone else should do it, I'm open to hearing that. But I would kind of take that type of conversation to a one-on-one Slack conversation or maybe a feedback call, rather than taking the whole group's time to resolve something like that. Okay, next question. How do you manage keeping work time separate if you work across time zones? Oh gosh, yeah, that's very tricky. The first thing, I mean, we do have a global team here at SketchDeck. We've got people across the world, so we run into this all the time. I mean, the first thing to say is reducing meeting time helps with this. Like, one of the things I think that becomes a problem is when you have too many meetings, and every meeting you have, you've got too many people trying to be part of it. That makes it very hard to schedule these things. It results in people needing to be working all hours of the day so they can always be on the meetings. So, I mean, the first thing I'd say is just following some of the principles I just walked through here. That should reduce the need to be having meetings across your team and at different time zones. So just reduce the meetings initially. Second thing I'd say then is if you can have, almost like split things up, have like people in the US have one group and then have one meeting, and maybe a spokesperson from that group can come forwards and do the same within a different time zone. That can be quite an effective way of not requiring everyone to be on meetings in their own personal time. And I think the final thing is it's probably just worth acknowledging that if you're part of a global company, that there will just be some element of meetings that need to happen either late in the evening or early in the morning. And just trying to kind of just be aware of that and make sure that doesn't happen very often. One example for us is that we do a full company all-hand meeting, but we only do that like every, I think it's every 2 months we do one of those. So once every 2 months, there is going to be a meeting, which is an awkward time for some people, but we're not doing those on a weekly basis. And generally, people seem to be accepting of that, given it's not happening very often. Okay, next question. Or maybe we're done. Oh no, another one. Oh, I'm sorry. How is your productivity affected at the moment with quarantine? Do you have any tips? Oh gosh, yeah. So this whole situation is interesting. I mean, we're a remote company and have been for about 4 years. So nothing changed with the quarantine kind of, it wasn't like we were working in an office and now everyone's at home. So things actually kind of continued very normally initially. I think the biggest thing that we've noticed for productivity is just the kind of elevated stress that everyone in our team, everyone in the world is feeling. And I think there it's worth just acknowledging that. I am trying to be very respectful of people and the commitments that they have. We have people on the team with kids. Those kids are at home as opposed to at school. So I think it's just worth firstly just acknowledging with everyone. Second thing is we do have some optional kind of fun meetings. Now that may sound like it's a total contradiction to what I've just talked through, but I do think having meetings with a pure goal of like bringing like team collaboration, like kind of building team morale is good. So on Fridays, we have a totally optional like 45 minutes where people can join, and we'll just kind of lead that and talk about fun topics and see how people are doing. So just kind of trying to like help people and keep a positive atmosphere is something which I think can help as well. And then I think finally just being there for other people and acknowledging that there are going to be some kind of compromises that have to happen right now. I think this is an unprecedented situation, and we need to be responsible as managers and leaders of businesses to make sure the staff, that the team are happy and accept that there's going to be some kind of compromises that people need to have at that time. And I think we found like with all those things in place, I mean, there's definitely been a small hit on morale just because it's just such a difficult time. But I think we've generally been able to continue doing most things very, very effectively just by making everyone feel supported. Okay, next question. What to do in a live meeting when your client repeatedly ignores your email requests and materials prior to meeting? Yeah, so I mentioned during this presentation that this is focused mostly on internal meetings because I think with internal meetings, kind of everyone can be and should be aligned around making sure meetings are kind of effective and team time is used productively. Obviously, once you're working with people outside of your company, you don't have any control anymore. Like they don't report to you, you don't report to them. Yeah, I mean, ignoring email requests, it's hard to know without much context there. Obviously, if this is if it's in more of a sales context, then people ignoring emails is commonplace. If they're a supplier of yours, I think it's slightly strange if that's the case. But yeah, I mean, the only thing I would probably say there is from a sales context, I think people ignoring emails is just part of the course. Like it's just going to happen. So just keep following up. That's just a generally good sales mantra. If it's someone that's more of like a partner of yours, like more of an equal, then I think it's worth just making sure that your communication is useful or important. I think sometimes people can get overwhelmed if there's a lot of just communication that's not that important. So just kind of maybe take a look at what the content of your emails are and check that that's useful. Maybe even just bring it up with the client in a meeting. There's often we would, so in a previous life when I was in consulting, we would often have meetings at the very start of a project where we would just talk about how we each like to work. You know, what is their way of working? What's their norms around like responding to emails, or when's a good time to have a phone call with them? Things like that. It's just good to kind of ask them, because if you learn about what the expectations are with that client, then you can start kind of applying that to your own communication with them.
All right. We're just about at 1:20 here. Chris, you've got 2 more questions in here. Maybe we can address this one, and then if possible, you could add a little note into your slide deck for the last one about how to switch off after work if you're working from home. So I think that's an important one for everyone. So
okay. Do you think the leader of the meeting might not be the boss, meaning the one who's at the top? Oh, totally. Yeah, it's very common for the person leading the meeting to be different from the most senior person on the call. Yes. Yeah, and so yeah, I agree. I think that's the question. It doesn't have to be the most senior person leading the meeting.
Fantastic. Agreed. All right, we're at 1:20 here. Thank you so much, Chris. That was great.